Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'd like to first acknowledge that we're on the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation, and we will call Thursday, November 18th, 2021, Comox Strathcona Regional Hospital District Board to order. And
Mr. Chair, I have a request.
okay,
It's Abram.
who do I hit now? Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Okay,
Sorry,
I'd like to. That's all right. Okay, I'd like to request that we vary the agenda to deal with item number 1 after we deal with item number 2.
Okay.
There's some things that don't quite jive. One should go before the other, kind of thing.
Okay. Do we need a seconder for varying the agenda? So do we have a seconder for the motion?
Second.
Thank you. So the motion's on the floor to vary the agenda, moving item 1 to follow item 2. Just basically reverse the order of number 1 and number 2. Did staff have any comment? Okay, nothing. So on varying the agenda, changing the places for item 1 with item 2. Is there anyone opposed? Hearing no opposition, motion carried, and we're into item 2 will, the agenda has now been varied. So adoption of minutes.
Move adoption.
Move adoption, second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, any opposed? Motion carries. Business arising from the minutes. Seeing none, carry on to reports. And item 2, strategic planning implementation considerations.
Move receipt of report.
Second.
Thank you. And we'll go to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And James Warren, the Deputy CAO, is here to present this report and answer any of your questions. I'll also acknowledge that representatives from Island Health, Max and Scott, are both on the line too in the event that you have questions that may relate to them as well.
Thank you, CAO. James, you need to get shift button.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Russell, and good morning, directors. And Lisa, if I could just get the PowerPoint brought up, please. So thanks, directors. I've just got a fairly short presentation here to introduce this report, and then happy to take any questions. And as Russell said, we do have Scott McCartan and Max. Sorry, Max, I can't say your last name, on the call as well for answering questions in the discussion. So thank you, directors, and I'm pleased to be able to present today's staff report on the strategic planning implementation considerations for you today. By way of background and a bit of context, the CSRHD board is very familiar with your current mandate, current purpose, which is the 40% contribution of costs towards the acute care facilities. That's the construction and equipping of those acute care facilities. Island Health contributes the remaining 60% towards those facilities. The RHD board has also historically provided $5,000 in grant funding to 6 different rural facilities, named facilities. For several years now, the RHD board has undertaken strategic planning in a few different forms. Most recently in January and February of 2021, Alison Hapkirk helped us work through looking at a number of key Island Health service areas to try to identify the range of potential opportunities that might be before the board to contribute towards improving public health outcomes in your communities. Following the February session, the board did identify then 3 particular areas that it wanted to investigate further, and that would be service hubs, the rural grants, and restorative and transitional health services. Today, that brings us to today. and an opportunity to present some of the findings around those service areas, those 3 topics, and an opportunity to invest in positive community health outcomes for your communities. It would include evolving your partnership with Island Health, and it would be done in a fiscally responsible manner, which I'll get into here in a couple of minutes. To provide some context around the 3 topic areas that have been considered, I'll just take a minute here to go through each of them. The service hubs concept relates to the fact that Island Health currently operates out of a number of leased facilities in most of the communities that it operates in on the island. Those leased facilities are often in disparate locations around the community. And what it means for patients is that they have to attend to a number of different locations, and they are maybe not receiving the most optimal healthcare because the physicians and healthcare providers also are working in disparate locations and don't have the ability to collaborate with their colleagues and other professionals to find the best service and options to clientele. By co-locating services in one location in a purpose-built facility, you can realize much greater health outcomes. You can see the professionals collaborating with each other to identify different solutions that don't necessarily exist when you've got the disparate leased facilities that we currently experience. One particular example is around mental health and addiction services. And that's a topic that has certainly been very timely in I think all communities, around BC. And so mental health and addiction services would be one component of a service hub where clientele would be able to receive an added value support. Under this concept with service hubs, the CSRHD, and it's explained in the staff report, the CSRHD would construct and then own the service hub, the facility itself. Island Health would contribute lease payments that would total 60% of the construction costs, and the RHD's contribution would be 40%, and that would mirror the current 40-60 split that the hospital board is familiar with on the acute care side. Under the rural grants topic, the analysis indicates that there's potential to expand the number of facilities and to increase the amount of funding. So there are a number of facilities that don't fall into that original 6. We've identified 11 additional facilities. Many of them are Indigenous-led health centers. And so the analysis suggests that there could be upwards of 17 facilities receiving funding. And we've identified that the amount of funding annually could be increased to $10,000. What that does is provide local decision-making for those particular rural and remote health facilities. Thirdly, transitional and restorative services is an area that the board wanted to dig deeper into. You'll note here that the title of the 3rd column is long-term care, and that's certainly referenced in the staff report. The reason being is that transitional and restorative services are often located in long-term care facilities. There's benefit of locating those types of services with long-term care patients. And so because they're often together, we've taken the approach to undertake the analysis to look at the 150-bed long-term care facility that Island Health is suggesting is required, is needed in the Campbell River area. We certainly could parse out the number of transitional restorative beds within a long-term care facility and provide you some analysis that looks at some percentage of sharing costs. But for sake of ease and to undertake this analysis, we've done that analysis based on the 150-bed facility. Importantly, right now there are many patients in our acute facilities, and that does add pressure and capacity concerns to the acute facilities. With a dedicated long-term care facility in place, those patients are able to be moved out of the acute facilities into the long-term care facilities, relieving that pressure and increasing capacity to a degree in the acute facilities. And as I mentioned, Island Health has identified Campbell River as the community with the greatest need for a long-term care facility on the island. These next few slides just speak to the financial analysis and looking at the debt payments, the tax requisition, and the reserve contributions first. there's a slight increase to the debt payment. This is a 10-year graph, a financial analysis for a 10-year graph. There's an increase to the debt payments initially to reflect the additional debt that would be taken on through a long-term care facility and service hub. And then beginning in 2028, there's a marked decrease in those debt payments because the North Island Hospitals project will have been paid off. So that brings the debt payments from just above 14 million down to around $8 million a year going forward through the 10 years of this analysis. But beyond that, of course, we can't forecast infinitely into the future. On the reserve contribution side, it's a similar story in that there would be no contributions to reserve over the coming 6 or 7 years until those North Island Hospitals projects are paid off. But then there's a significant increase to the reserve contributions, upwards of $8 million per year. Importantly here too is the tax requisition. In 2021, the tax requisition was set at 12.6 million. And this analysis suggests that with all three options, the service hubs, the rural grants increase, and the long-term care facility, the tax requisition can be maintained at $12.6 million annually. This slide shows the reserve fund status over the same 10-year period, comparing a status quo scenario with the board giving direction to undertake all three options. So we currently are sitting at approximately $25 million in the reserve fund. And under the status quo approach of maintaining a $12.6 million requisition and not undertaking any of these three topics, the reserves grow to $74 million at the end of our 10-year analysis period. If the board did give direction to undertake all three options, similarly, we're starting at $25 million. The reserves would decrease over the coming 6 years because there would be monies withdrawn from reserves to assist with the additional debt that's taken on and the rural grants component. But then at that 6-year mark, when the North Island Hospitals project is paid off, the reserves would be able to climb to $34 million at the end of 2032, which is still a substantial amount of funds to address any kind of capital needs that Island Health would identify at that time. And then finally, I just land with the recommendations. First one, these are abridged, summarized, of course, but the first one, to undertake further assessment and policy development with Island Health on those three topic areas. Today is an opportunity to continue this discussion, advance, and give that nod towards expanding on these three topic areas. There would be many more reports to come back to the board in detail and policy updates, agreements, etc. But this would be that recommendation to get that ball rolling. Secondly, we've certainly heard there's an interest amongst the board around modernizing the legislation that we operate with, looking at regional and provincial equity. And this is a really good opportunity here for the board to continue advocating for that balance that it's seeking, while at the same time, if the recommendation one is supported, then we can advance and look to improve quality healthcare in your communities. So, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions that we have, and like Russell said, the Island Health representatives are also on the call here to help in the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, James. And sorry, Mr. Warren.
All right.
So questions from the board? I'm getting used to your system. It's different than ours. So first to Director Arbor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. What a great report coming out of our strategic planning session a couple months back. I think staff has really crystallized the opportunity with Island Health around this. And I think part of what we have to weigh as a board is, I know the reserves have been built mostly with acute care, hospital replacement in decades from now. But what this does is really, it encourages us to help bolster the healthcare system in both the Valley and and up north in Campbell River and surrounding areas. I can't speak to the long-term care aspect in Campbell River because I haven't really acquainted myself with that need up there, but I can definitely speak to the first two, the rural grant expansions. A couple of my communities would be included in that. $10,000 is not a huge amount of money. I think we all realize, but still, I think to add those facility and First Nation facilities as named facilities makes a lot of sense. They've kind of been on the out for some time. The service hub, absolutely. I think there's a need in the valley, and I think James did a good job of highlighting all the beneficiary elements of moving towards a single facility that's integrated, especially as we deal with the the drug and substance use emergency that's been declared by the province, but also with a lot of other cases. And my only request maybe would be if Island Health and our staff can connect with some of our nonprofits early, like the Community Health Network, because when we talk about a hub, I think we could end up with a hub that's really Island Health focused, so really integrates their services. But we know that there's a lot of work done by nonprofits in the space and connecting the dots on the health side with so many constituents. So I would encourage, I know it's just a remark, I would love it if in the next few months we actually took the time to do that, to connect with those nonprofits. Fully in support. I hope most directors will be as well.
Thank you, Director Arbor. We have Director Adams.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff, for the report. Certainly concur with Director Arbor that the rural grants are something that is long overdue to be addressed, to be able to enhance those services in those areas. The service hub also makes some sense out of the array of multiple leased facilities that are scattered all over, and there is some merit to consolidation. But the number one priority has been and continues to be, not only for this Comox Strathcona Regional Hospital Board and District, but also to Island Health, is the need for extended care beds in the Campbell River and northern area. And that has been a priority for a very, very long time. The land is there, the building design is there, and I think we need to find a path forward to get that moving as quickly as possible. Where I have some concerns, though, is with the model, and it's been talked about it, and I don't want anybody to take offense to the term pay to play, but regional districts should not be put in a position of competing for provincial dollars based on their ability to have that money readily available. I think it has been in the past always based on need. That need has been identified, and I think it really is incumbent on Island Health to act on the need, not the other opportunities that are being presented. The other issue that I have is that when we took out the requisition for the two hospitals, that was done by way of going to the constituents. And they approved that borrowing for the funding for the two hospitals. And I think if we are looking to significantly expand our mandate and take the requisition that we sought approval for and extend that in perpetuity, we are doing a disservice to our constituents. And as such, I would propose that continuing on the discussion of the three services that are being suggested, but if we are going to amend the requisition that it was for a finite purpose and a finite term, then that should be going back to the constituents perhaps at the next municipal election in October, to get their approval of carrying on with the requisition. I don't think us as a board have the right to be able to impose a requisition, which is essentially a tax, in perpetuity for something that they haven't been consulted with. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Adams. And then we have Director Abram, followed by Director Hamir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to James for his very concise and very articulate report, summary of everything that's before us. So thank you, James. Secondly, some of the comments Director Adams just made, I totally agree with. And they sort of worked their way into the long notes that I made myself before this meeting regarding the two recommendations that are before us on the strategic planning. And James sort of rolled everything together into the summary report, and I've rolled everything together into summary answer. And I'll just start, and you can, cut me off if you want, Mr. Chair, but I think in the reason I wanted to move this in its position in the agenda was because there's things that we might do in this recommendation that would have an impact on the provisional budget. And we don't have another meeting, I don't believe, before the deadline. If we do, I'm sorry I missed it. But basically recommendation 1 is written in such a way that it sounds like we agree with these items totally, and that we want to find a way to make them work. And that's possible, but it's not necessarily true. I had assumed that this was going to be a discussion as a board, a CSRHD board, and not a discussion with Island Health. Island Health is here, that's fine. We have no secrets. But there's a quote there that says, and further that letters in the recommendation, and further that letters of support be provided by the chair to Island Health for the service hub and long-term care facilities. There are actually 3 items that are listed in the report. So I'm wondering, why does that recommendation, that one-liner, not also recommend that we include the rural initiatives as something to say in this letter of support? It's just not there.
Do
So-
you want me to answer that now, or?
If you wouldn't mind, James,
Sure.
when directors are asking questions, if we can hold it to that one question, and then we'll have staff respond. If staff aren't wanting to respond, then we'll carry on.
Thank you. So,
Okay, if you don't,
okay, you're right. The further that clause does speak to just the service hub and long-term care facilities and letters of support. Intentionally written that way because of the amount of work that would be required to get moving on a service health hub and a long-term care facility, and the RHD's support for those 2 particular topic areas. The rural grants, expanding and increasing the amount is a much more straightforward exercise. It would require naming additional facilities, and there's some policy updates to be done, but it's a much more straightforward set of tasks.
okay, fine. Well, that would mean there would be a follow-up letter at some point that would say, yes, we support that, and we want to be a part of, making sure those happen, I would assume. The consolidation of the various services in the valley under column number 1 in your report, James. I'm just wondering, why have people looked at this as there's options. We do not have to have a new building built, maybe adjoining the hospital or near the hospital or whatever. Perhaps there is a building within the Comox Valley that could house all of those services in one place. It would not cost an arm and a leg to build as a custom build and then become a 40-60 split. If it was just, if you're leasing now and it's being paid for by the province, then why couldn't you lease one building and have that paid for by the province and not have local government tapped into to pay for extended services, basically. So, you know, that's that part. Then the last column there that was in James' report, I'm just wondering, maybe somebody from Campbell River, Mayor Adams or sorry, Director Adams or Director Cornfield can answer the question. Has Campbell River gotten all of the long-term facilities as have been promised, as Director Adams mentioned, for many, many years? I can remember sitting in the tourism room with all of the VHA top people talking about negotiating a smaller hospital, or sorry, fewer beds in our hospital, because we were going to get at that time an additional, I think it was 40, correct me if I'm wrong, but an additional 40 beds, and they were going to be in place before the hospital was built. So, you know, if we haven't gotten all of the beds that have been promised over the years, and now we're talking about 150 spots being created, it sounds like possibly we're going to be paying for them twice, and I don't think that's correct. Recommendation 2, it sounds like a great idea, and I thought that it would come out, if I thought that it would come out in our favor, it's a great idea. But I don't believe that it will add a greater percentage to the provincial contribution, but will come back as an increase to the local government contribution, which I have to assume that's what anybody on a negotiation table would want at the provincial end. So I think this recommendation, the way it's written, leaves that wide open. It's basically just saying, we're going to talk about it, but it doesn't say, this is what we want. So we've been working towards a buildup of our reserve funds so that we could reduce our dependence on requisition in the future. And I don't see how this does that. You know, looking at that graph, we're still going to be $40 million less, have $40 million less in reserve at the end of the 10 years, which could be going towards, I can't imagine that we're not going to have to increase the size of one or both of our hospitals in 10 years. That's just going to have to happen. That's a matter of, I think, common sense with the growth in our population. So I would have assumed that that reserve would have helped do that to contribute our 40%. But now if we're reducing it by $40 million because we're doing a new build, as Director Adams mentioned, one that was not approved by the taxpayers, I think that's, you know, something that really needs to be considered and should be, the new initiative should be provincially funded. There's a quote in the report on the provisional budget. It says that these discussions would also provide for some direction related to future expenditure reserve funds. The 2022 provisional budget is presented in the report, does not contemplate any expanded role for the CSRHD. However, the CSRHD board is considering the outcome of its strategic planning sessions in November 2021, that's right now, and staff can incorporate any such changes into the 2022 proposed budget to be considered in early 2022. So this suggests to me that we may tap into that reserve in order to pay for the new initiatives that we have not as a board even decided upon that we want to see happen. So that's why I moved it to this position, because it was putting the cart before the horse, approving the budget, and then coming down here and talking about the budget. So anyway, I'm not in favor of going that direction. I think that the rural issue not being mentioned in this report at all, as far as advocacy to the government, it leaves me feeling like, there's rural areas that are, it's going to be sort of a second fiddle letter, and I don't like that. So anyway, appreciate the report. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to me and not cutting me off, Charlie. Thank you.
You're welcome, and I hope everybody got my email out to all the directors. The idea is to participate and speak. And speaking of speaking, Mr. Dyson, our CIO, I think wishes to respond to a couple of comments from Director Abram.
Yeah, Director Abram makes some good points, and I'd like just to add a little bit of information on the basis of that. And the first one is that you don't need to necessarily amend the proposed financial plan today based on what you decide on this matter. We would come back to you with any implications in the first meeting in the new year. And we do not anticipate that those changes for 2022 would be significant. It would only be the resources necessary to undertake the work that is contemplated here, the analysis and such. So there would be no threat to reserves. And then the final point is that based on what is in front of us now and the challenges that may be placed on our communities in the short to mid-term, we feel that the reserves are in a very healthy place, whether you proceed with these initiatives or not.
Thank you. Thanks, Ed. I have Director Amir, Lee, and Sullivan, and for first-time speakers, and then Director Arbor.
Thank you, Chair. I want to concur with some of the earlier points that were made about staff really having taken the time to listen to all of the needs of some very different areas. I appreciate that we have a nice menu of options that I think really help to serve the needs of the different communities. But I had a couple of questions. The first one on the rural grants, I really appreciate the expansion of the list of facilities. And I'm just wondering what the relationship is with First Nations Health Authority. Is there a jurisdictional issue there? I'm sure this funding would be appreciated, but I just wonder what kind of relationship is currently in place and what would be needed to provide fundings for some of those health facilities listed.
Okay, if you want to hang on a sec, we'll see who's best to answer it. Maybe Max or.
Yeah, I can try, and then Max, maybe you can add to this. So the Indigenous-led health centers were all identified through the analysis that we undertook. They would need to be named as named facilities by the minister in the same way that we've named the other 6 and the hospitals themselves. As far as the First Nations Health Authority, I'm somewhat familiar with that, but I think Max, there's a deeper relationship there between Island Health and the First Nations Health Authority, and so perhaps you could comment on any sort of connection to that First Nations Health Authority.
Yeah, what an excellent question. Thank you so much for bringing that forward. So this would not be in place to go around any type of processes or procedures that are already in place. What this would offer is a new avenue for those community health centers and those community groups to be able to put a request forward for additional support for those non-capital needs.
Thanks for clarifying that. That sort of eases, just I wasn't sure about protocols in that section. Chair, if I may have a second question, is that all right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to address, some of the comments made by Director Abrams around a facility being built in the Comox Valley and whether or not there was one already. I'm assuming that our staff would be looking at that first and foremost. But having participated in a food hub feasibility study, I know there are very few buildings of that size, specifically in areas that are accessible to the community. I would assume a facility like this would be needed somewhere in the downtown core where people can get to it easily. And I'm not aware of any empty buildings that are currently of that size there. So, but if staff could just maybe go into a little bit of the process of what, if we were to move forward on that first recommendation of the service hub, I'm assuming, was a scan already done? And if so, if we don't have a building available, what would be the process of acquiring land and then doing the build?
Thanks, Director Hamir. And again, I would look to Max to help supplement this. Certainly there'd be a connection with Island Health to be able to identify the design, the services included in a service hub, the optimal location, that environmental scan to identify any existing buildings. And I know, Max, you've already undertaken some work to put together maybe not an indicative design, but identifying some of those services that would really benefit from a co-location. Could you expand on that work that you've already done and whether there's been any sort of look at existing facilities and locations?
I see Scott jumped off mute. So Scott, why don't you jump in there?
Yeah, thanks, Max, and thanks, James. So generally our process would be to develop a sort of a clinical services plan that outlines all of the services, adjacencies, co-locations that we would like to see in a new facility or a new build. And as part of that process with the local governments, and as was mentioned, there are other needs in the community. We would want to include those as stakeholders in developing what that vision would look like. The next step is to take that and turn it into what's called a functional program, which just dictates sort of how much of what type of space needs to be built in what configuration. Once we have that, we would likely then go to market through a competitive RFP process. And to Director Abrams' question earlier, we would ask for proponents to propose a variety of options, including, lease, buy, or build options. And certainly, if there were a lease option that was optimal, we would be more than open to exploring it. But even with a leased space, there will be millions of dollars in tenant improvements required, and we would still hope that there would be some partnership or cost sharing on those tenant improvements. But there's also the option that we could explore of, an ownership type deal where we're a tenant of the CSRHD, in which case, we would pay a lease and the CSRHD would build equity in the property as opposed to, a depreciating asset that you build no equity in a leased space. So hope that answers the question. I'm happy to answer any follow-ups.
Thank you.
Anything further, Director Hamir? Director Hamir?
Oh, sorry. That was answered my question. So thank you.
Okay, good, thank you. We have Director Lee, then Sullivan, then Evans. Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
First time.
I am not going to wade into these project proposals at this time because I think that a lot of things have to happen over the next few years to allow these to proceed. Number one on our list should be requesting approval from our electorate, because you are taking money out of the pockets of the property tax owners, the homeowners. And as we all know, homeowners are very stressed at the moment, holding on to their homes, dealing with escalating costs and inflation right now, other emergencies arising. I feel that we're a long way off. The Health Act would need to be changed to allow some of these. We haven't had, as the strategic plan asked for, a very detailed look at the financial delivery of these projects. Like, you're still talking, Max is still talking about potentials, about being a leaseor or not. And furthermore, we built these two hospitals with the monies that were approved by our electorate, and the $25 million was taxed from them for the hospitals and for future expansion of our hospitals. And I'm concerned that repurposing this money without asking the public is really not a good thing to do here in politics. And if you respect your constituents. I also wonder if the new proposed long-term care facility, which would require a change to the Hospital Act, is that going to be built on the current hospital site? And if so, does that restrict any future expansion that we put aside that $25 million for? Because we built these hospitals when the hospitals were at capacity. We will need to expand them in the future. We can't just fritter away the money on our boutique projects.
Okay, Brenda.
So those are my questions.
Okay,
So before I would trust going forward with any signing of any formal agreements with Island Health, I want to see some good faith from them. I want to see pathology restored at our hospital. I want to see them live up to what they said we were going to get.
Okay, you asked some important questions of Island Health. Max or Scott, you have a response?
I can certainly answer the question around the location of the long-term care facility. And yes, it's planned to go on lands that are currently owned by Island Health, contiguous with the current hospital site. It's in the northwest corner of the site, adjacent to Yakulta Lodge. So it's physically isolated from the existing hospital and would not be suitable for acute care expansion. But I'll just add that we do have a large number of long-term care patients currently in the hospital. Those hospital beds could cost up to $4 million a piece to build, and $1,000 a day to operate, whereas we could build long-term care capacity to unencumber those beds for $750,000 a bed and $250 a day. So given a choice between expanding the hospital and building long-term care, on the margin, it makes much more sense to build the long-term care as a way to expand acute care capacity than it does to build more acute care capacity when we have long-term care patients currently in acute care.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Max. And we'll go to James.
Thank you, Chair.
The referendum question, or the, I think it was approval of the electorate.
Yeah, thanks. A couple of comments have been made with respect to the borrowing bylaw for the North Island Hospitals project. Under the legislation, the hospital district does not need to obtain electorate approval for borrowing bylaws. That's part of the legislative authority of regional hospital districts. And so the strategy going back probably 15 years was to increase the tax requisition to a sustainable tax rate. And that was done, enabling monies to be put into reserves, enabling the final amount that had to be borrowed to be significantly less But the borrowing bylaw itself did not go to the public for approval. And that's not a requirement through the legislative authority that the regional hospital district has.
Thank you. Anything further, Director Lee? Otherwise, I'm going to move to Director Sullivan.
So that, doesn't the Hospital Act need to be amended to allow us to contribute to some of these projects? First, doesn't that have to happen
James?
first?
Okay, hang on.
That's not my understanding, Director Lee. The Hospital District Act and the letters patent for the Comox Strathcona Regional Hospital District allow for the equipping of healthcare facilities and such. So no.
Okay, just if I could get further clarification on that, James. But does it not have to be a listed facility or a named facility?
Yeah. Yes. The regional hospital district provides funds to named facilities,
Right.
and that's a request that is made to the minister.
Right, so it doesn't require the legislation to be changed, but the minister would have to approve it, right?
That's correct.
Is that clear, Director Lee?
It'd be a ways off before we would get that approval.
My understanding is that additions to the named facilities can occur quite readily. All it requires is the minister's signature. It does not require going through cabinet or the government legislature. So, okay, yeah, our list is building up. So I hopefully
Thank you.
that clears everything with you, Director Lee, Director Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to express my excitement for these recommendations. I feel that the process has captured the majority of the board's feelings moving forward. Our citizenry need these services, and this is a really progressive move. And I'm really thankful to staff for their progressive attitudes towards moving forward with this. And I think that the public really wants to see improved care as soon as possible. And I think this speaks to that. And I wouldn't like to see delays. I think we're overdue for these things, and I really would like to see this moving forward quickly, and I support it wholly. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Director Sullivan. We'll go to Director Evans.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I see this report as, again, just follow up to our strategic planning session, but I see it as early days for all of these initiatives except the long-term care, which I'm going to speak to in a moment here. But to me, the business case is still, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of business cases developed for a service hub. When I look at it as an opportunity that we had in our discussion around strategic planning, this same need exists in Campbell River. The opportunity to have a model like we did for the North Island hospital model, where we have mental health and addiction facilities coordinated between both Island Health and our non-service providers in some kind of a service hub was a vision that we had. And so, again, I think there needs to be more work done on a business case that would really identify meeting the needs of both of these communities. So certainly appreciate that. Sounds like in the report that Island Health is actively pursuing a service health hub in the Comox Valley. But as far as a business case is concerned, the need is greater than that. It goes across all of the North Island. So I certainly would want to see some more information and further development on that. As the mention about the borrowing bylaw and that being clarified, I still think it's critical that we have community engagement, community participation as we move forward. When I think of all of the opportunities that we have had in our own community, and I'm sure it's throughout all the representation here around the table, those discussions are key early on. And I would expect that no financial decision would be made without wholesome community engagement before we move forward. So I similar to Director Adams' comments, I would see this consultation happening, possibly moving forward into the municipal election as a key item for consideration. The long-term care facility, as indicated in the report, right now it feels like we're at a static point. I see this as one of the highest priorities. We are 35% higher need for this facility on Vancouver Island. The 35% higher than any other island average, or the island average, and the highest of any community on Vancouver Island. So this one I really feel has the business case developed for it. We have the land in place. This is one I would like to see move forward, but again, I recognize that this is taken as a full package and a full report, but I do have concerns for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Evans. Just before I go to Director Cole Hamilton, I'm going to give the unprecedented approval to Director Arbor to speak for a second time. You want to go with the list? Okay, thank you. So, Director Cole Hamilton.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to staff for this report. I see a lot to like here, and I think I see this as allowing us to make some near-term improvements on things that desperately need improvement, really relieving some of the pressure on our acute care facilities, resolving the lack of long-term beds care beds that Director Evans was just speaking of, and trying to improve the quality and delivery of services in our community by co-locating and hopefully providing a higher level of care there. Here, we're not trying to make the decision today as to which choice we're going to make. We're simply trying to go further down the route of exploring these options, and I see no downside to doing that. I hear Director Lee's concerns about acute care capacity. We need greater capacity now, and these are ways that we can actually create that capacity by taking some of the burden off the acute care facilities by putting together other facilities. If we wait for an acute care facility to be within our budget, that could be decades, many years. It would be the most expensive and longest term and slowest way of trying to deal with the problems that people in our communities are facing. So I see this as a well-researched set of policies, and obviously a business case needs to be developed and public consultation has to happen. But I think we would, I don't think we'd be doing a service to the community if we didn't explore these more carefully and more fully. So I'll be in favor here.
Thank you, Director Cole Hamilton. Director Grieve is our first time speaker. Did I do it right or wrong?
That's the right button there, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Well, I guess I'm a bit of a wet blanket here, but first of all, this is just a motion to further assessment analysis of the discussion. So you can't help but approve that. So we can't help but approve the requested action on this. But, you know, I think we have to realize that as local government and as a hospital district, our primary directive is to provide capital for acute care facilities. Is that not correct?
Named facilities.
Pardon me?
Named facilities.
Named facilities. And mostly on acute care.
Correct.
Okay. Now this, of course, is getting away from all that. Now, I get it because when we had this discussion back in the days when Island Health was promoting one hospital somewhere in Dove Creek, we brought up the issue around alternate care and extended care. So I know that Campbell River's been waiting a very long time. I think Director Lee nailed it. And it keeps getting, kicked down the road. So I do think, though, that we're entering a slippery slope, and we have to be cognizant of that. I have a family member who did 2 terms as a minister in the previous government in Victoria. And he warned me that that with the huge aging population and the growing tsunami, that the health budget was soon going to overwhelm the entire provincial budget. So we see things like, you know, taking on stuff that may not be core municipal services, going outside our mandate. And I would bring attention to the fact that a number of years ago, when Courtney and other communities on the island and in BC were looking at emergency housing and emergency services for homeless people, that we visited the facility at the Salvation Army in Nanaimo. And when that ribbon was cut on that facility, then Minister Coleman came to the ceremony and puffed himself up even bigger than he usually is, to announce that he was happy that the government could help Nanaimo with their problem. So I think therein lies the rub. We have to be very careful of provincial Greeks bearing gifts. Now, I'm reading here that integrated health, we're talking about preventing family breakdown, poverty, homelessness, mental health and addiction. And I just don't know when these became local government priorities. We do it because we care for our people. But every time you take it on, the senior government is only too happy to let us do it. So just be cognizant of that fact. I think the province should be doing a lot of these things on their own. And we talk about mental health issues, and we've had about 3 decades of failed policy on mental health. There seems to be the can's getting kicked down to, again, into our court in our jurisdiction. So, the province, I read in the paper now, if I may just take a little bit of latitude, I read in the paper now that there's criticism of people advocating that municipal governments spend their tax dollars on core municipal servicing, like your roads, your garbage, your water, things like that. And the argument is that, oh no, we're taxpayers and we should be able to tackle these problems as well. Well, we're all taxpayers for sure, but only when it comes to the federal and provincial government. And they pilfer about 93 cents of every tax dollar out of your wallet. That leaves us with 7. And it's certainly not evenly distributed. That 7% is paid for only by, and directly hit this one on the head as well, only by families that own their own property. So only property owners pay this tax. So it's vastly unfair to take that money and distribute it in the wider population. Obviously, everybody gets to play when it comes to elections at municipal level, but they don't have to pay. So spending other people's money is always better than spending your own. So I think it's kind of disproportionate. I think the senior governments have unlimited avenues of raising revenue. We're stuck in this basically a medieval kind of a tax system where the lords of the land pay taxes. So you have to keep that in mind when you bring this stuff up. Certainly, we're going to look into this. Certainly, we'll see what we can do on our level. But let's be clear about this. These are provincial issues, and they're only too happy to have us take up the slack. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Director Grieve. Director Morin, then Unger, Wally, and
great, thank you, Chair. Well, I'll follow Director Grieve's passionate comments. Yeah, I mean, I really actually agree with so many of the points made, even if they seem to be conflicting. I mean, there's truth in what everybody has said today. As someone who's spent far too much of the last 3 weeks in the hospital with family members in hallways, I've seen firsthand the need for sure. And what I see is that acute care is pretty narrowly defined. So not for lack of the professionals doing the best work that they can, but people are released from the hospital. And it's a bit like a revolving door because they're released a little bit too early, in my opinion, and then they end up back in the hospital in acute care again, and then they're out for a bit. And if you're unhoused and you leave with an infection and you have nowhere to go and no one to help care for that wound, then you're back in the hospital again. And sometimes you're one of the people who is in there for long term, taking up that space. So it's not just elders impacted, moving into long-term care. It's actually a variety of people. So I guess, I mean, I'm in favor. I think I'm in favor of taking a look at this, but I do have a bunch of questions that I'm hoping will be addressed. I understand the rationale for the service hubs, streamlining, making things one stop. It certainly, I think, in theory, would make services better for people who are already accessing, to improve accessibility, and it reduces stress on those folks not having to figure out where they're supposed to go. I also have a family member who is trying to navigate that system, often ends up at the wrong door because it's so confusing. So I guess I'm just unclear about how it's going to improve services, expand services, or provide services to new people who aren't already in the system. That's one concern I have. I really liked Director Sullivan's comments about the progressive view, I think, of this report. And I completely understand Director Greaves and others' comments about how we get, inundated. Local governments get the pressure on them to deal with this. Having said that, I also think looking at the way we, outside of the box in terms of getting away from this one idea of what acute services look like and where they need to be, there's no reason why some of the that the model can't incorporate some acute services in these other areas. That's almost like a hybrid. So it's almost like that transition between people, leaving the hospital and getting to a place where they don't need the services of the hospital that are costing so much money. So I think it really warrants some creative thinking and some brainstorming around how it could work. But I do have a lot of questions, and I do agree with many of the comments. I just think that it is something that if we don't take a look at it, the clock is ticking. And I guess I would agree that, and this is my final comment, absolutely the public is concerned about how money is being spent. But I hear these comments all the time about how the needs are not being met in the current system. And I think if we can show that there would be some improvements, I think the public would be on board with this kind of thinking outside the box approach. So that's my comment for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Morin. Scott or Max, did you wish to respond at all?
Nothing for me. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just, I know I had a lot of comments in there without a direct question, but I guess my question would be how the service hubs in particular would improve or expand services for people rather than improving them for existing clients.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. All those great statements and that question. So, the integrated care movement has been the way that health service delivery and design has been moving towards in the last few decades. Various health organizations globally have moved towards integrated health. The NHS in the UK is a great leader in integrated health hubs and integrated health systems. Then when we look at the literature around healthcare outcomes for individuals, we understand through the literature that individuals who are receiving care who have multiple comorbidities or multiple reasons to access care, when they receive that care through integrated care teams, through multidisciplinary teams, to be able to be co-case managed and co-supported, provide some really great benefit and outcomes for those individuals, and ultimately some really great benefits and outcomes for communities that are being served by these integrated networks or integrated health hubs. There's a ton of literature out there. In 2018, a systematic review of integrated health networks or hubs, looking at the UK model, looked at hundreds of peer-reviewed articles and identified that through those articles, the consensus came forward that there's definitely a great realization of better outcomes for individuals that are served through these type of hubs versus receiving services through individual programs or silos. Or even, when you think about having to bounce through different programs or different offices, even the shared case management or the shared clinical assessments or the team dialogue around supporting individuals, especially those that are most complex, is much more difficult for care teams if those care teams are dispersed amongst a wide array of locations, and even being able to coordinate a team kind of meeting around individuals makes it much more difficult. Adding to that, the social serving sector is shown to be a very vital component of integrated health hubs. The comment made earlier was a really great comment to, as this work moves forward and progresses, to make sure that Island Health and the communities are talking about what full integration between health and social services looks like, to be able to partner with the nonprofit sector, the social service sector, and also to be able to partner with municipalities, because municipalities also hold a function to be able to provide services that are bettering the health of communities and community outcomes as well. More upfront when you look at the social determinants of health. So great questions, great comments, and definitely a lot of benefit just when we think about the outcomes of people and population. It also has great outcomes for health service delivery as well.
Okay, thank you, Max. I had just one comment that may lend this. In the Cowichan Valley, are they not incorporating a hub with their new hospital?
Thanks, Director Cornfield. I can answer that. There isn't a new hub as part of the new hospital, but the same sort of lease consolidation has been contemplated and has been in planning for the Cowichan Valley for a number of years. And so, yes, there is a similar project being advanced there. And I believe the Regional Hospital District in Comox Valley is a partner in cost sharing on that project.
Yeah, that's not the Comox Valley, it's the Cowichan Valley, but it's okay.
Sorry, I thought that was the question.
Yeah. Okay, so our next speaker, Director Unger, then followed by Wally and Kerr and McCollum.
Hey, thank you, Chair. Thank you for a fantastic, great report. Tons of information. I really appreciate all the great comments from the directors showing their passion for health in our area. Regarding the rule not being the recommendation, that's been clarified. I feel, we're definitely moving in a new direction if we move forward with this. A couple concerns, the 60-40 split. What are we starting? What are we going to be getting ourselves into? And if we do these projects, are we taking dollars for future expansion of our current hospitals or any expansion in our rural clinics? I know, like say for Gold River, that we haven't had an expansion here for many, many years. And, sooner or later, we're going to need some work done on it. So, my concern, are we taking big dollars from that? It's definitely outside our current mandate, so we'll have to work through that. And yes, like Director Grieve said, we're taking on provincial issues. But I think that one of the most important points, Director Adams and Evans, consultation with our constituents is a top priority. We have to make sure that they are fully aware of what we're doing if we're going to go down this path. I am in favor, I will say I'm in favor of further looking at the assessment and the analysis to see where this will take us in the future. So again, great passion from all our directors.
Thank you, Director. Director Woolley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It seems to me that the $1,000 per day for an acute care patient that ought to be in long-term care, and subtracting from that the cost of long-term care for those patients, that this would approximately equal $1 million per patient over 4 years. Now you multiply that by, I don't know, say 50 patients, that's $50 million going directly into provincial coffers if they were to build this facility. Now, with this kind of money, it seems to me that they could well afford to meet their provincial obligations to build a long-term facility without us financially subsidizing what is in effect their sole responsibility. And it's my opinion that every time we hold a strategic priority session and invite Island Health to participate, we are in effect telling them that if they just stall a little longer, they'll succeed in acquiring more capital from our taxpayers. Now, I think that if we just keep this up, that this will eventually become provincial strategy. It'll be more of a permanent policy for funding all their healthcare initiatives when they see how easily this little thing works. Now, if we have millions of dollars in reserve that we are able to easily give away to subsidize what is the provincial government responsibility, then it seems to me that we've overtaxed our constituents and we should be returning that money to them. We don't need the money, we can give it away. We should go back to the taxpayers. Now, government well knows, provincial government, that they have orchestrated the crisis that we have in acute care by not providing us with long-term care facilities. They're in effect downloading provincial costs onto the property taxpayer. And the solution is just ask us to pick up the slack. So my question is, isn't it true that in one of our previous meetings, Island Health committed to building a long-term facility in Campbell River, even without our financial help because of the acute need that we have here?
I can answer that. And thank you for the question. What Island Health committed to was we are going to complete a business plan for the development of 150 new long-term care beds in Campbell River. And we will submit that to the Ministry of Health, who will then take it to Treasury Board. But at that point, the decision about funding is out of our hands. So our commitment is not to fund it. Our commitment is to complete the business case and advocate for funding. But ultimately, that decision will be made at Treasury Board.
Thank you for that response. If I might just say, Mr. Chair, I think it would be in our best interest to wait to the result of the Treasury Board to see which direction they're headed in before we go any further. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Woolley. Now Director Kerr, and then McCollum, and then I think if there's no other first-time speakers, we'll go into second time.
Thank you, Chair Cornfield, and thank you for the report. And I've really enjoyed the discussion, and thank you, Chair Cornfield, for sort of priming us for this kind of discussion. It is a fascinating field, and I think, you know, this is maybe a watershed moment in what direction we go. Really, I think that healthcare is, you know, holistically speaking, connected to every aspect of our communities, of our government responsibilities. I do have concerns over the belief that building a shiny new building with a, you know, a proposed hub concept is going to solve the problems that we see out on the streets. You know, we've seen in lots of communities that housing first models that build brand new apartment buildings and house the homeless or warehouse the homeless doesn't solve the underlying issues, and they need the supports. Harm reduction only keeps them alive, but does not change the underlying issues. I think that, you know, if we're going to spend big money, and at some point governments are going to have to realize that, we need to look at facilities, specialized facilities for the mentally ill, the mentally challenged, and not have them on the street. You can't just medicate them and put them out on the street, or medicate them and put them in an apartment building. They're just going to burn it down. And the same for drug addiction, that it needs recovery programs, not just supplying them with drugs so that they continue. If we're going to find a way out of this, we've got to change the underlying issues. You know, my concern, and I certainly, I do believe, and I see the sense in hubs and bringing services together, but really, to me, that you know, a lot of those services and a lot of the people that are going to attract are not compatible with each other. You know, for instance, childcare is certainly not compatible in a building with mental health and addictions clients. And also, as we've seen in a lot of our downtown cores, that campus models that bring more and more people from outlying communities into our urban centers is not good for the businesses, is not good for the health of our downtown cores. So there's these kind of challenges that somehow by building a new building, we think we're going to solve. But I really come back to, if we're going to place our money, it's not in buildings, it's in recovery and properly dealing with the issues that these clients and these they're not taxpayers, but they're certainly our constituents require.
Thank you, Director Kerr. James, nothing. Max, or any comments? Okay, we'll move on to Director McCollum.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'll try and keep my comments pretty brief because we're getting pretty far into this discussion, and I think a lot of it's already been said. But just first off, I want to emphasize that I think this was a really good outcome that came out of our strategic planning process that, you know, involved the whole board and reflects the needs of different communities. And I want to underscore what we're considering here is assessment and analysis of these options. I don't see the harm in looking at expanding things like an integrated service. It's a better service. It's how healthcare is moving out of this strictly acute care model, and that if we want to better address the complex needs of various issues in our community, we need to look beyond how we're doing things currently. I think everyone here can see that there are widening gaps as we move along. And then I just want to speak to this issue of the downloading of provincial responsibility onto municipal government, or local government in this case. This is something that we're seeing with all kinds of different areas, particularly around housing. And we always say that housing is provincial responsibility, but municipalities are well aware that if you're hoping to get housing needs addressed in your community, you need to come to the table. And what that usually looks like is providing some land. And in this case, if we want to have a means of moving some of these initiatives forward, we may not like it. We may expect that Island Health does this without us coming to the table and providing funding, but the reality is that the provincial government has a lot of priorities, and our priorities are not always in sync with them. And this is one means and one lever of perhaps moving things along a little bit quicker, and whether that is the long-term care or our service hub. This is kind of the situation in which we find ourselves, and this is a means that we have to address that. So while it would be great if we could simply say, no, you guys look after this, the truth of the matter is we're one small area in the province, and us taking that approach could be fairly counterproductive to what we want to see happen. And yeah, sure, I imagine eventually we will get a long-term care facility built in Campbell River, but the timeline may be different than what we want. And I don't really see a lot of drawback in continuing down this road and getting some more information about what that's going to look like.
Thank you, Director McCollum. Want to go and hit first-time speakers first, and then we're going to take about a 5-minute break where you can stretch your legs, because I know we've all been sitting down. And so Director Paulson, followed by Vice Chair Hillian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to speak to the comment by Director Adams earlier about whether the services are put in based on need or based on funding. And having worked in healthcare for 35 years and in the community, the funding model seemed to always be based on funding rather than need. And so what would happen is the acute care stressors were downloaded onto the community, but the funding wasn't. And so in order to put the services in for the community, it added very much stress onto the communities, and where there was no increase in staff hiring or no increase on extended care, long-term care beds. And what resulted in was the people that most needed the long-term care services and the home care services were just left out in the cold, and the home support services couldn't be put in place because there was a cap on the funding, even though the need had increased greatly. So that seemed to me like a problem with the funding. So when you talk about the $1,000 a day that these long-term care people are taking up or costing in the acute care services, there has to be some way that funding or funding that will cover the cost of a long-term care bed would be put into long-term care and into the community. So we do have a big issue with services, and especially in the rural areas where, it's great to have these service hubs created, and I think they're a great idea so that people don't have to travel from here to there for the different services. But in the rural areas, we have minimal services. And so I think looking into the expanding the rural clinic grants and also the services, the grants is the funding, but let's look at the need. What do these rural areas need for services? And certainly moving to the urban areas for long-term care is an option, but often the people that are struggling with mental health issues or other medical issues have to go into the urban areas for these services. So I'd like to see some concrete expansion into these rural areas so that we have more services to offer the people. And I think that this report is great, but it certainly needs further exploration. That's my comments.
Okay, thank you, Director Paulson. Vice Chair Hillian. Oh, number 12.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate everybody's input. I share a lot of the concerns. Nonetheless, I think we have an opportunity here to do something different that could be a game changer. I'll give one example of service consolidation into hubs. Many of you in Campbell River and area may be familiar with the Foundry operated by the John Howard Society, where youth mental health services are consolidated in one location with outreach and various ancillary services located there. This is an initiative that in fact takes a substantial burden off the acute care hospital. And John Howard Society is establishing a similar facility in the Comox Valley. They conducted an extensive search for a building that was appropriate. They did manage to find one with great difficulty, but now of course are having to spend a ton of money on renovations. So I trust that our staff, if we pursue the hub option, would look at all the possibilities. If it turned out that we ended up with an asset that this board, this hospital board owned, I would see that as being a substantial benefit. Not only the additional leverage that would give us for future borrowing and other such purposes, but I would see it giving us some leverage to advocate for services through this partnership with Island Health. And I know some of us are particularly interested in increasing services such as men's health, to address the ravages of the opioid epidemic and other social concerns that we have. Like it or not, we all share these responsibilities. We have to find a way to work with the province and with Island Health to improve the services that our communities are crying out for. I think that the old saying that the squeaky wheel gets the grease it still remains in effect. And there's no better grease than bringing some money to the table. I think this is an opportunity that we can't pass up. It enables us to preserve the level of the requisition, which with perhaps one exception, nobody's advocating that we abandon. And it leaves us with a substantial reserve at the end of a 10-year period that could be applied to expansion needs for our acute care hospitals. So I'm happy to support this recommendation and move us forward into further dialogue and analysis on these projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hildian. It's now 11 o'clock. Thank you, all the directors, for your comments and concerns and issues. We're not going to stop, but I could use a stretch and get our legs and think about things. My comments are building on what everyone has said. We're the only regional hospital district that I'm aware of that is doing strategic planning. We initiated it regional hospital district, correct? Russ, as far as you're aware. We're the only regional hospital district doing strategic planning that I'm aware of.
Yeah, we staff undertook that question to all the hospital districts several months ago, and at that time, some were considering it, but you were the most advanced in terms of your strategic planning initiatives.
And so that's one thing that I'm very proud of our board, is that we do strategic planning rather than waiting for the hospital projects to be paid off. We had a 2-year gap while they worked out all the bugs with the new hospitals. But once that reached, our role was quite diminished, and we didn't need to, in my opinion, we didn't need to wait till the project was paid off before we figure out what we're going to do next. And so I'm very proud of the board for doing strategic planning that works, strengthens our working relationship with Island Health. We've also individually and collectively, to a certain degree, fostered a greater relationship building with our First Nations as well. And we did have the First Nations come and make presentations to our board from the First Nations Health Authority. And yeah, so I see us moving along. I believe very strongly that, yes, we don't have a legal requirement to obtain the approval of the electorate. However, we were successful in the 2 hospitals because we had the support of the electorate, or of the electorate. It's our constituents were behind us all the way. That gave us the strength to work together to make sure we got the hospitals. So I believe very strongly in that public engagement. In order to engage the public, I would certainly know I have a lack of knowledge of the big plan for the healthcare continuum. Max or Scott made reference to a vision, building a vision, to come up with a plan to make things work. And I think we're at the point right now that we need to refine and define what a service hub is. If we're going to engage with the public, we better know what we're talking about. And that means a lot of work. We also need our rural grants to look at what do they need out there. The long-term care is the same. So there's work we have to do with Island Health in order to be able to go out and engage the public. And yeah, I just look at this as our first step, and that's refining and further assessment, policy development, talking with Island Health, working out what it is we need, looking at all of the considerations as brought up by board members. So this is the first step down the road. So, and with that, I'll call for a recess for five minutes enough. Looking around at the few directors we got here, 5 minutes enough? Yeah. Think about what everybody said. We don't have a motion on the floor. It's just receipt. So maybe should we call receipt motion? Okay. More speakers. Oh. Okay, yeah, we'll do that. I'm sorry, I didn't see Director Colburn's hand up, but she has not spoken yet. So we'll take a 5-minute break and then come back and think about things. And we'll lead off with Director Colburn and then call a question on receipt, or we'll get into the second multiple time hockey players. Your mic's still on. Anyway, take a break, think about things, and we'll come back.
Thanks, Chair.
James or Russ, are you still on there?
Okay, we'll call our meeting back to order. And we have Director Colburn as a first-time speaker on receipt. Director Colburn, are you there?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can. There you are. We saw your picture for a second.
So I really have enjoyed the opportunity for the discussion and the thoughtful remarks from the directors, what I've heard so far today. I agree with a lot of what's been said, public approvals, were mentioned by a few directors, the mental health and addictions, comments that were brought up by Director Kerr, and the downloading. I think Director Greaves spoke to that. So I'm not going to rehash any of that, but I think a couple comments I would make is that if we are doing analysis and assessment on rural grant expansions, as well as inclusion of facilities, I'd really hope that analysis would consider some type of a rollover model for those smaller facilities that are already named, that they may use that more effectively for larger buys, infrastructure, etc. The hubs conversation, I'm really interested in seeing where the province is going to go with this model. I know there's been a lot of talk, these days from the province about themselves building kind of health hubs. I'm just kind of referring to the comments that were the announcements that were made by the province about kind of the clawback, or not clawback, the reorganization of things like autism funding. And so knowing what their plans are would be key, I think, and I would hope that the analysis would include that. And also the chair's remarks about FNHA. I think that they need to be at this table as much as Island Health is. I think that they are partners in healthcare, and I think that we work better when we work together. And so knowing, kind of the province's plans and stance on some of these things, and including FNHA as a participant, would be really helpful in these conversations. So I'll leave it there at that. That's just a couple of things I wanted to mention that hadn't been maybe before. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Colburn. So we have a motion on the floor for receipt. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Second time speakers. Now I have only 3, 4 no. So we'll go with Director Arbor, Abram, Moran, and Evans. And then I'm going to call a question on receipt. Director Arbor. Oh, do I have to? Oh, huh.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and I'm thankful to the chair for encouraging everybody to participate today ahead of it. And you know, I really hope that almost everyone will vote in favor of continuing this exploration. I do want to say that, you know, I think it's easy to make grand statements about the downloading of responsibilities by the province. That plays well with the electorate always, and there's a lot of truth to it. But I think Director McCollum had a really good point, is that if you want to achieve things these days, you can't just keep passing the buck and punching up to the higher level government. You need to collaborate. A few months ago, a year ago, you know, I kept being told internet is not a local government concern. Well, you know what? We put a little bit of local government resources into it, and then the province stepped up in a big way for Hornby and Denman. We see that in housing, we see that in everywhere. So one question I may have to Max and to the Island Health staff after my comments is, if the board did not move with this exploration today, what are the chances that we're going to see those facilities and those improvements in our healthcare in our region? I think that was one question that Director Wally had around long-term care, and that is probably the crux of the question. My sense is that many of those considerations would kind of move into second level priority, as opposed to, if we want to address some of the problems of today, we have to play ball, in my opinion. That's just a pragmatic approach rather than just saying we're going to do nothing. In response to Dr. Kerr's comments, since we got the report on Friday and now, I did reach out. We had a really great drug and substance abuse strategy presentation at the Comox Valley Regional District at our last board meeting. And that's led by a broad coalition of folks. So I did take a call with them, and after they read this report, and I asked them for their opinion, whether they saw it as something that would be worthwhile in regards to Service Hub. Will it solve all the mental health and drug issues in the valley? No, it won't. But they resoundingly said, you need to explore this and see if this can work. They were really positive about it. So rather than having my, you know, uninformed way, that told me that even for our grassroots nonprofits that are front, you know, fronting all these issues in our communities, they see the value of this, and they were all three of the people I talked to said, great. You know, this is a step in the right direction. So that's why, for me, I'm really comfortable saying, let's try to move forward with it. And I think we should move the 3. It just makes sense. We'll get more information later. And as Dr. Cole Hamilton said, there is no downside whatsoever to passing this today. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Arbor. Okay. Looking around, Director Abram.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank all the directors, everybody that has participated in this, for all their great comments. Whether I agree with them or not, they were very well spoken. And Director Grieve and Unger and Wally and Kerr, you said a lot of the things that I had already sort of mentioned in my long preamble to this subject, but it sounds like we're, you know, in heated agreement on some of them. And what I am concerned about is that, first of all, we heard from VHA, I believe it was Scott, that said that, they haven't really done a complete assessment of what there is in the valley or anywhere for consolidation, and that there may very well be something that they come up with in their discussions. And I think that we should possibly wait for that assessment to come back to us. They may come back and say, you know what, there isn't anything. We got to do something together. Or they may come back and say, you know what, we found a great building and everything fits, and it's downtown and blah, blah, blah. So, I don't want to second guess what might happen, but I think it is a possibility. The other thing I would like to just mention quickly is that people keep saying, there really is no downside to moving forward with this recommendation. Well, if you read it carefully, it says that we are basically directing that further assessment and analysis be undertaken in partnership with Island Health to develop the required policies, agreements, and financial plans for, et cetera, the three things. And further that, we write to Island Health and all that. That is not, like, that one word, to develop, basically says we're looking to do it. And I think if you're going to explore, if it's to work in partnership with Island Health to explore the required policies, agreements, and financial.
Director Abram, I'm not trying to cut you off at all, but you're speaking to a recommendation that's not on the floor. So we're still on receipt. And what I want to do is try and get through try and get through the second time or third time speakers and call the question on receipt and then move to the development of a recommendation. Okay.
You're the chair. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Director Morin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment around if we go with this recommendation and proceed, I'm hoping that part of the analysis will be around what kind of a true partnership looks like. I think there's some concern about what this will look like in practice, and I'm hoping that beyond providing capital for the building, that we would have information around the specific outcomes that we're hoping to see, and that there would be some negotiation there. So that's just something, I guess I'm speaking to the recommendation. So I'll stop, sorry.
It's okay. You're bringing up good points, I think. Director Evans and then Adams.
Thank you, Chair. And just two quick comments and one question. Just a comment around the hubs and the fact that it's great to have a building and consolidated services, but we all hear in our communities the challenges that the nonprofits are having to deliver those services and just the lack of capacity that they have. So if this moves forward, just in whatever way that we can look at a consolidated model that also looks at how we would incorporate nonprofits into that hub model would be something that I would hope would be considered. My question is more related to the report that's in front of us, and on page 2 it says the Treasury Board will consider all projects submitted by Island Health on each project's merits. And where local financial contributions are also applied, more facilities and services can result. And I think that's been a challenge for us. That certainly was part of our strategic challenge, planning challenge, is to understand what does that mean. If a project moves forward on its own merits, and again, speaking specifically to the long-term care facility, and the justification for that. Will that not move forward on its own merits, and that be the reason why it would be funded? What this is saying is it's just holding out that doubt that, yeah, but if you give more, you will receive more. And I think that still feels like that's a fairly gray area and one that I feel challenged with. So respectfully, Chair, if Island Health does have maybe some comments on that, I would appreciate hearing that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Max or Scott?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Director Evans. And it's a good question. It's a challenging one to answer, given that we don't control the process or decision-making at Treasury Board. And so it's kind of like a bit of a black box to us. But what I can say is that there is likely a finite amount of funds for long-term care expansion in the province. And what I do know is that there are dozens of business plans being developed in every jurisdiction across the province, and they will all ultimately end up at Treasury Board. And whether Treasury Board decides to fund the projects based on metrics like long-term care wait lists or ALC pressures in adjacent hospitals or financial considerations is not up to us. But there is a possibility that they could view an opportunity in another jurisdiction that has equal merits in terms of healthcare service delivery, but a more appealing financial model because there is regional district cost sharing. They may choose that one instead. So certainly I would expect Treasury Board to prioritize these based on merit, but where merits are equal and they can get a better return on their investment, they will likely do so.
Well, thank you for that very forthcoming response. Thank you.
Okay, Director Adams.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of the board members. It's a really good, healthy discussion. I do want to just put a little bit of a response to Mr. Warren, and he is correct that while there may not have been a ballot for a referendum, for those of us that have been around, and particularly in healthcare for a very, very long time, or on the board for a long time, all of the reports from staff to the board and all of the communication to the public for the funding and construction of the 2 acute care hospitals was for a finite period of time. And that was the understanding of the board members of the day that made the decision to go ahead and approve the significant increase in the requisition. And that was clearly articulated to all of the people in the Comox Valley and the Strathcona Regional District as to what the requisition would be and how long it would be before it was being paid off. So if we are making a change now, we need to do the same due diligence to the constituents that we serve to make it very clear as to what is exactly being talked about here. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Adams. So seeing no other speakers, we're going to call a question on receipt. Is there anyone in opposition? Hearing none. Call the motion carried. On to recommendations.
Second.
Okay. What I'm going to ask you to do is recite your recommendation and whether or not they would go into the end further and further. So we'll take them in what I like to call in seriatim. Do the first one, please. Okay. Did I get them? No. Okay. Did I get you? No.
You got me instead.
Give me the note.
Thanks. So I'll move that the Comox Strathcona Regional Hospital District Board direct that further assessment and analysis be undertaken in partnership with Island Health develop the required policies, agreements, and financial plan for A, supporting a service health hub through lease consolidation and program collocation in the Comox Valley. B, evolving and expanding clinic grants in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. And C, supporting a long-term care facility in Campbell River as described in the staff report dated November 10th, 2021. And further, that letters.
Well, hang on, let's take them in. That one is one piece.
Oh, no, I think that's on the recommendation.
Well, one recommendation.
There is a second recommendation to be looked after, but.
Oh,
You got it?
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Okay, and further, that letters of support be provided by the chair to Island Health for the service hub and long-term care facilities. And finally, that reports be presented to subsequent Comox Strathcona Regional Hospital District Board meetings as required.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Speakers. I have Director Abram, Director Lee, Director Abram.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the way that it is written, it's close to being supportable for me anyway, but there's a couple of words that I think need to be changed. And I think that in the second line of the very first paragraph, where it says be undertaken in partnership with Island Health to develop, that word develop needs to be changed to explore the required policies, agreements, and financial plans. That would be the first part. And the second part would be the first and further that letters of support be provided by the chair to Island Health for the service hub and long-term care facilities in between service hub and we should be inserting, comma, expanding clinic grants in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. And so those two, if those two things were in there, then we would be actually having a conversation with Island Health and anybody else that needs to be involved.
Friendly
The way it's written now,
Director Arbor has indicated that he would consider those friendly amendments. Is that okay with the seconder? Seconder's okay. So they're considered friendly amendments and
thank you very much.
And you're going to pop it up on the screen. There. Okay, and we'll just. Okay.
Chair, may I ask a question while you're doing that?
Certainly.
I'm wondering if staff could comment on whether or not the exploration and assessment that is contemplated could include informing the board of any opportunities for public engagement in relation to charting this direction.
Okay.
Yeah, public engagement will be part of the process. We would be developing those communication plans and such as a natural part of our work. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. And I think that would address a key element of the concerns that have been raised this morning. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's why originally all I wanted to do was the first portion that would cover off the first paragraph in A, B, and C. And then when we talk about the second one, it would have been included in one of those in the second paragraph there, the first and further. But if you where do you want to put it in there? I think that it's important if the board wants to see that community engagement or that a plan for community engagement be developed and brought back to the board, then the motion should reflect that. I'm not big on a lot of things that are understood at the time, and I believe that it needs to be spelled out, whether we do it as part of this motion or as a subsequent one after this, that's fine. And through to James Warren. Oh, hang on. I got to figure out which seat are you? 19?
Thanks, Chair. If the board would be open to it, perhaps inserting between, in the third line down, in between financial plans and 4, something to the effect of consideration for public engagement. So that the CSRHD board direct that further assessment and analysis be undertaken in partnership with Island Health to explore the required policies, agreements, and financial plans, including consideration for public engagement for, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Director Arbor has moved the motion. Staff have recommended that the following that you see up there now. So it would be financial plans for and including consideration of public engagement. We find to the seconder? I can't remember whether it was Director Grieve or Director Hillian. What's that? Okay. Director Moran, can we assume you considered it friendly as well?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. 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 Do we have it?
I believe so.
Director Arbor is moving to the, does that one reflect what you're, okay? So our next speaker, Director Abram, then Lee.
Thank you,
Sorry,
Mr.
forgot,
Hello?
sorry, forgot to lower my hand.
Oh, okay, Director Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering about B, because I thought that our hospital board does have the authority to increase the clinic grants for our 6 clinics in our budget. I mean, we did it last time when I made a motion to raise it to 5,000. We could do it right after this is over to put in the provisional budget.
Let's get an answer from staff.
So I don't know why we need Island Health to study that, because we could do it without them.
I said, Director Lee, hang on a second. We'll just get staff to answer whether we have that ability to expand the grants. Oh.
We did it before.
Thanks, Chair. The decision is well within the RHD board's authority. There is a policy in place, a financial planning policy that speaks to the grant amounts. And so that policy would need to be amended. I think our intent as staff would be to bring back to the board a recommendation to update that policy to reflect the expansion of facilities and the increase to the amount. As well, staff will have to work with the ministry to add the named facilities to the.
Right, we would still need the minister to sign off if we were to expand the number and location, correct?
Correct. And with respect to the provisional budget, it could be incorporated today. I think preferably we would want to
see what it looked like first before we make any changes to the budget.
Yeah, and then we could bring that back in the new year.
Okay. That answer your questions, Director Lee?
Yeah, I just think it's thrown in there to garner support for the whole thing. We could do it without adding B in. We could grant B to all the clinics that exist right now.
We can't do B other than the current ones. We could not expand the list without getting approval. Okay. Any other speakers? Oh, Director Grieve. Now I got to figure. I think you're seat 17. Yep.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I don't know if this is the right opportunity to bring something forward, but maybe it doesn't really fit with the second recommendation. But basically, as we move forward on this, regional districts have experts in fields like planning, finance, engineering, and solid waste, liquid waste management, et cetera. what we have, you know, with all due respect, we have no staff with background in the culture and psyche of healthcare and, you know, inside knowledge of how the ministry works. So I'm just wondering, moving forward, are we maybe looking to get somebody with that kind of expertise, because we are throwing around hundreds of millions of dollars here. And I know we did get expertise when we went for the hospital plan. So my question.
Thank you for the question. And we will be bringing that forward when we bring the financial plan back to you in the new year to take a look at your actions here and what the resources are that are required. And I can assure you that we will look at ensuring that we have the best quality of advice to provide to you at the most effective and efficient price possible.
Okay, thank you for that, CAO. Any further speakers? I'm not seeing any on our list, none around the table. So call a question on the recommendation that's on the screen. Pardon me? Did you put your hand up again, Director Lee?
No, after. I want to speak to the recommendation.
Well, we're on the recommendation.
Now that it's on the table.
That's what we were doing.
Okay, I want to just have my opposition noted about this recommendation until Island Health is able to deliver and maintain our hospitals as they promised and bring back the pathology service and other services we were promised in Campbell River and never got. I'm not going into any agreements. I don't want to go into any agreements with Island Health. I think if the Comox Valley needs a hub, they should create a hub from the Comox Valley and do it without Island Health.
Thank you. This motion is, I thought, was clarified to explore required policy as agreements and financial plans, including public engagement, which would then come back to the board again. Correct? So the question has been called. Is there anyone in opposition?
Director Lee?
Director Lee?
Wally's opposed.
Wally? Any further? Can I get you to scroll the list just to check? Okay. So the motion carries with 2 opposed, Director Lee and Wally. Okay, everyone see recommendation number 2. The Comox Strathcona Regional Hospital District write the Ministry of Health, including the Premier of BC, highlighting the importance of regional equity for healthcare services and requesting that a legislative review be undertaken to modernize provincial legislation that provides a framework for financing capital healthcare projects.
Second.
Speakers? Pardon me? I can't hear you. Director Abram.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, as I said in my preamble on receipt, which it should have been here, is that, you know, this sounds like a great idea, but I am not convinced that it is going to come back in our favor. It's going to possibly come back. I mean, it's always, when you look at something like this, it's always a possibility that things will go completely sideways than the way you expected them to go. So I think it is important that we look at regional equity for healthcare services. But I am hoping that the province will take that wording as meaning that we are basically asking for a fairer split on the 60-40 I assume that's the funding we're talking about here. And if I'm wrong, tell me so. But that legislation does need to be definitely looked at and revised concerning capital healthcare projects. So I think I'm going to vote against it, and just because it isn't quite clear.
Thank you, Director Abram. I'd like only one word changed, and that is Minister of Health, as opposed to the ministry. Okay, those are friendly. Just before we do that, I have some comments on this one because I don't see anyone else in the speaker's queue. This is something we have been trying to get done for ages. Goes back, at least back when I chaired the board as mayor, that when Deborah Oakman was here, we tried to get it updated and modernized. The problem, and it's been brought up today, and even Max brought it, or Scott brought it up when he said, when projects go to Treasury Board, how are they viewed? And when you have some regional hospital districts funding projects outside of what everybody else is doing, now it puts added pressure on each of the others that are out there. And this is the situation that's occurred on Island Health. I know for sure, having chaired many, or at least not chaired, but having been to many chairs meeting with Island Health, and they bring in Capital Regional District and say, oh, look what they're doing. And, everybody should consider doing this. And it might be fine for Capital Region. It's got a big population base. They can afford to do it. Ours is not bad, but we're not the biggest in Island Health either. It is much more difficult for smaller hospital districts like Alberni, Clayoquot, and even Cowichan had difficulty with it as well. So I think it's important that the legislation be very clear so that everybody operates under the same rules and the same provisions. So, and I think we've been advocating for it. I think the letter is to write as one. I would suggest that we request a meeting to discuss it further with the minister and turn up the heat a bit. So if the board is comfortable and you want to leave it in the hands of staff and the chair and vice chair, I'm sure we will craft up something. So, Director Abram.
Yes, sorry, I forgot to, you sort of reminded me of this when you started talking. It was mentioned earlier, I believe Director Evans brought it up, and that was that projects should be considered on their merit. Well, and what you're talking about is what we've mentioned throughout this conversation is that, as Scott mentioned, it's not just merit, it goes to Treasury Board. And if another regional district, if you have two sort of equal projects and one regional district is offering a bunch of money, well, they're going to be considered first. So the regional equity issue is the way it's written in this particular recommendation is not really strong enough, I don't think. It's not just.
Will you trust us to write an effective letter and then copy the board?
Oh, absolutely. I trust you implicitly, but
okay.
If you, I'm just giving you my opinion that I think that it's not the regional equity per se that we're talking about. It's the efficacy of doing project X in this regional district or project Y in that regional district. And it should have nothing to do with whether or not one or other of the two funds it. It should have to do with the need. And if the need's there, then look at it.
Okay, I have made,
You got that. So if you've got that, I'm happy with you writing the letter.
I have got projects based on merit and based on need. And this highlighted on my notepad.
Good man.
Okay. Director Lee for the final time.
This is my first time on recommendation too, and I'm not voting in favor of it because I am happy with the 60-40 split that we have right now. And I know that our property taxpayers have some certainty in how much we're going to have to raise. And I would remind everyone that wasn't on the board before our new hospitals were built that we taxed our property owners, believe it was 81 cents per thousand of assessed value for 10 years to save up $89 million to put to the Treasury Board as a down payment for our hospitals, which significantly reduced our debt. So not only did we have a need for new hospitals, a desperate need, but we had we needed equity because we weren't getting our share of the healthcare dollars coming back to the North Island, but we also had money. And that is how we got the Treasury Board to approve the hospital projects. So to say that it's going to be on merit alone, it's not realistic. So I'm happy with the way we do things now. And in fact, you know, our hospital district, we actually had to pay $3 million and produce a business plan for our new hospitals because Island Health didn't do it for us. We had to do that. So, you know, we are in charge of what we're doing here, not Island Health.
Right. Thank you, Director Lee. And yes, we did pay for the business case. And it was to remove the obstacle that Island Health had put in place as a reason not to move forward with the hospitals project. And then we were credited that $3 million against our 60-40 split.
Mm-hmm. And we paid an $89 million down payment.
Yep. And others have followed our model. Cowichan followed the same thing because our staff went down and met with their staff to show how it was done. Anyway, on recommendation number 2, is there any further comment, any amendments anyone wants to see? Seeing none, I'll call a question. Is there anyone opposed?
Lee?
Director Lee in opposition. Anyone further? Seeing none, motion carries with 1 opposed, Director Lee. Okay, don't get running yet, Director Grieve. I believe we can now go to item 1. Receipt's been moved, seconded by Director Grieve. Item 1 deals with our provisional budget.
Move receipt of report.
It's already been moved. Receipts there, moved and seconded.
Yes, Chair and Directors, and just think if you hadn't amended the agenda, you'd be done by now, but maybe not. So,
no, we would have had more time.
There you go.
We'll turn it over to staff.
Yep, and I'm going to ask Kevin DeVell to present this for you and answer any of your questions.
Okay. Oh, is he seat 9? What? Just a second. I take good money for a car. There you go.
Thank you very much to the chair, to the directors. Good morning / afternoon. What is being presented to you today for your consideration is the 2022 provisional budget. This budget is being presented to you in accordance with our financial planning policy that was kind of noted in the previous discussion. That policy was last amended in 2018 to include some updates, including adding some additional dollars to the community grants, as was previously noted. This is the first of up to 4 opportunities for the board to consider the financial plan for the coming year. As it was noted, the provisional budget is a legislative requirement and provides the board authority for expenditures until it is replaced by an adopted annual budget, which of course needs to be adopted prior to March 31st. Via the financial planning policy, we would typically then bring back in February a recommended budget. And the reason for that timing is typically we don't receive the finalized project list from Island Health until the end of January. That does not preclude us from bringing anything further back in January if so the board so desires. And then of course we would bring it back for one final time in March to deal with the adoption. So just to give you a bit of an overview on the budget, and then I'd certainly happy to answer any questions. The provisional budget being presented to you today, as was again noted, is a current state of the course budget. And obviously, we did not want to presuppose any of the discussions that just took place with respect to the board's strategic considerations, but certainly would look to incorporating any directions from the board into, perhaps, subsequent versions of this budget, or more than likely subsequent financial plans as we go forward. With respect to the 2022 provisional requisition, we have left that at the $12.6 million, which is unchanged from 2021. Based on 2021 revised assessment rolls, that would equate to a rate per thousand of 0.3821. For a home assessed at $500,000, that would mean a tax impact of $191. If the home was assessed at $550,000, that would then be a tax impact of $210. And of course, once we receive the 2022 completed assessment roll from BC Assessment in early January, we would then update those apportionments accordingly to reflect those new assessments. The annual funding allocation of $1.85 million for minor equipment and projects remains unchanged from prior years. And once again, that is being funded entirely through the current year tax requisition. Currently, the annual unconditional grants of $5,000 for the named health facilities are included in this particular budget to the tune of $30,000. And again, that is driven by the financial planning policy. Total outstanding projects from Island Health total just over $2.6 million, and that's broken down into carry forwards of commitments from prior years of just over $2 million for those projects between $5,000 and $100,000. And then for projects exceeding that, we do have $533,000 carry forward for 4 particular projects, most notably be the UDMD project. With respect to our ongoing debt servicing, that remains at $10.8 million overall for the coming year. The lion's share of that, of course, is for the North Island Hospitals project. And that particular debt continues to be slated for full repayment in 2028. Currently, the provisional budget does not include a contribution to reserves for 2022. However, once the 2021 year-end surpluses are determined, staff will be revisiting that and likely be bringing forward a recommendation for a reserve contribution at that time based on the surplus dollars available. The reserve balance, as was articulated in the previous report, currently stands coming out of 2020 at $24.2 million. Of that, we have approximately $12.5 million that is fully unencumbered or uncommitted, with the balance representing the dollars that we have continued to put aside for Island Health as part of that $1.85 million, and of course the $2.6 million in commitments that I just spoke about. And lastly, the administrative charge by CBRD to the hospital district remains at that 2012 level of $151,000. So that is the end of my report. Again, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Seat 17. We'll find out who it is. Director Grieve, followed by Directors Abram, Hamir, and Lee.
Thank you, Chair, and through the Chair and the CAO to our acting Kevin. I suppose we parked our reserve funds somewhere in MFA. Is that correct?
Through the chair to Director Grieve, correct? I mean, we have a couple of different institutions we deal with, MFA certainly being one, and our normal lender, Royal Bank, being the other.
Okay. So, do we know what funds it's parked in? Is it equitable, sustainable funds, or do we know anything down to that level?
Don't have that information readily at hand. Certainly something we can bring back to the directors. But at this point, yes, I mean, we will certainly look at between those two institutions where we feel, we're getting quote unquote best bang for the buck, and then making those contributions accordingly.
Yeah, I think it behooves us to actually, capitalize as much as we can on any interest, and also where we put our money. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Abram, and then followed by Amir and Lee.
Great presentation, and I just wanted to make a note to our CAO, Russ Dyson. I will not be opposing this provisional budget. So mark that on your calendar, okay?
Good, you just gave him a coronary. Okay, thank you, Director Abram. Director Hamir.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to staff for the presentation of the budget. Just a question around the funding for the rural clinics, and the advice from the board is to move forward on increasing that amount and potentially more sites. And so I'm wondering how soon we might hear back that that's possible. And do staff see that we can easily include that in the 2022 budget within, I guess, February is what I'm wondering.
Through the chair to Director Amir, I guess my answer is partly two parts. First of all, as far as increasing the amount to the existing facilities that we currently fund, that would require simply an amendment to the financial planning policy. With respect to the addition of the 11 proposed facilities, that would be a bit of a longer exercise, but certainly we would then, move away from today, reach out and determine kind of how quickly we feel we could get those approvals in place. In theory, that certainly could be possible, as we present the recommended budget, but I wouldn't speculate at this point.
Yeah, if I may, I think the board's direction was clear to explore the three different options, and that being the middle one needs that exploration work and keeping, and then reporting back to the board, and then the board can make a subsequent decision when it considers all the information brought back from staff.
Okay, thank you. I am hearing from some of the rural directors that an increase of the named facilities that we have already would be valuable and helpful. So, I think in subsequent meetings we could explore that as a board and allow that to happen ahead of waiting for response from Island Health or the minister on the new facilities.
And if I can just to answer it, Director Hamir, I appreciate your concern and the ones that the smaller communities have brought up. We could look at an amendment to the budget to increase contributions to the existing listed facilities, and that could occur between now and the approval of the budget. So if you feel so appropriate at the next meeting, you could always move a motion to that effect. Okay. Yeah, no, I just want to, I see, Arzina, there we go. Director Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on Director Amir's comments, I would like to give a notice of motion that the CSHRD amend our financial planning policy to increase the rural grants to our 6 named facilities to $10,000 each to be included in our 2022 final budget.
Okay, just before I accept it, well, you need a seconder, but
Seconded,
pardon me.
second by Unger.
Okay. Yeah, we have a motion to receive the provisional budget,
Okay,
which is where
so,
we're at. So the
so-
motion, notice of motion would come after that, Director Lee, and would
Okay.
require a seconder.
okay, it was seconded, but I'll wait. I also
Yeah.
had another question, unrelated, and that was, I was just wondering about the monies for, in the provisional budget for the unit dose medication project. It's been on our books for a couple of years now, and it just keeps rolling over. It seems like the money is not being allocated for this project or spent on this project. So why is it still
Okay.
coming up?
I don't think is Max or Scott still on the call. I think they're gone, aren't they?
No, I'm still here.
Okay.
I'm not certain. There's a lot of projects on the go on the island, but I will connect with the project lead for that one and ask them what's going on.
Okay, when you find out, Scott, could you let staff know here, and then they can circulate it out to the entire board?
Certainly.
So, and okay, thanks very much. And
Thank you.
to Kevin for
Yes, thank you, Chair. To Director Lee, maybe just to partly answer your question. Yes, this has been on the books for a few years now. But again, it was overall the RHD portion was 737,000, and we have paid out to date about 577,000. So we're certainly weaning this down. But absolutely, again, we'll be looking forward to seeing this, kind of come off the books eventually.
Right.
Thank you, Kevin.
okay. Our Deputy CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in respect to Director Lee's comments around the notice of motion, first off, the CSRHD does not, the procedure bylaw does not have notices of motion. Rather, we would ask that directors, thank you, Director Lee, for sharing what your thoughts were with that next meeting consideration. But we would ask that directors engage with Jake or Lisa to put your request on correspondence. We can include that on an agenda. That's the procedure bylaw does allow for that. Secondly, the board's motion around the strategic planning and the rural grants, I think that covers off what Director Lee was intending around the increase to the grant amount and then further the expansion of the number of facilities. And we will report back to the board and we will identify what that policy changes need to be and the process. And so,
okay. Good. Thanks for that explanation, James. So everyone clear? Now we're still on this bridge, still on receipt, are we not?
Okay.
Yeah, we have a motion for receipt. You're clear, Director Lee.
Just on what our legislative officer just said. I don't see why we can't move forward with our 6 existing rural grants and change the policy prior to going through this other process that we just approved because that's going to delay it for another year. We're not going to get the
process
back within a year.
What James was saying, it will not delay it for another year. The motion, if you just send a note, an email or whatever, nope. James, to clarify the process that Director Lee can use to have this put on the next agenda.
staff will be bringing this forward for the next agenda because of what the board just passed on strategic planning. We've heard Director Lee's interest in advancing the additional funds for the existing 6, and so that will be part of the report that comes forward.
Right.
Okay.
And that'll be at our next board meeting. Are you clear, Director Lee?
I'm typing it up in chat right now.
Okay, thank you. So on receipt, seeing no further speakers. All in favor? Is there anyone opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. The recommendation of the 2022 provisional budget for this CSRHD be adopted as presented. Moved and seconded. Discussion. I am seeing no hands up, no lights on. So on the motion, is there anyone opposed? Seeing no one is opposed, motion carries. And I believe that, does that include our? Oh, yes. Oh, really? Is this where you're going to, Director Arbor? Is this your one that you're gonna? On the management report. Thank you.
Second.
Moved and seconded for receipt of the management report. Director Colburn, did you have a comment on the management report?
I was just checking it. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know that I can't see the text, but. Oh, okay. Okay, any questions on the management report? Seeing none. Is there anyone opposed? Motion carries. I have 2 words for you. They're not happy birthday. No bylaws and resolutions, no new business, no addendum, no media questions out there. And Director Arbor's been dying to move termination. And seconded by Vice Chair Hillian. No discussion. Call the question, is there anybody in opposition? Hearing none, we are terminated.
James, did you get